Okay, I'm just making sure the final person in the waiting room comes in, hopefully. Um, but it's 5 past, so we'll get going. Um, Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Aoibhinn Crimmins. I'm the campaigner here at the Conservation Council, and I've learnt a lot at my now year here. Um, Doing community organising as a part of our Western Edge campaign. I'm also lucky enough to have gone to a really fantastic intensive training called Leadership, Organising and Action earlier this year. So this webinar has come out of that training. The kind of theory behind this methodology is that leaders create new leaders. So I didn't want to just go to that training and keep all the knowledge for myself. I really want to share what I learned at this training because I found it incredibly inspiring, highly applicable to the work we do here at the Conservation Council, especially within the Western Edge campaign that I'm running, but I also think applicable to all of our member groups and really just anyone who wants to make change. So yeah, today I'll be overviewing this community organising methodology that I learnt in the Leadership, Organising and Action course. And that course was adapted from the work of Marshall Gans, based at Harvard University. So he is kind of a pioneer of community organizing, and his work has been used now around the world and is taught around the world. So yeah, that's the topic of today's webinar. But first, I'd like to acknowledge that I presume most of us are joining from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and to pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today, and to pay my respects to Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I'm very grateful to call this beautiful part of Earth home, and very grateful to have grown up here and been raised by this country, and now want to give back. And that's why I'm here at the Conservation Council doing this webinar. So, just some housekeeping. So GRIT is here under CCACT. So if you have any technical difficulties, please just message that into the chat and she will try her best to help address those. As I'll be presenting, I won't be able to address technical difficulties. As for questions, because we have a relatively small group, I would actually rather if people come off mute or raise your Zoom hand. So to do that, you have to go to React and then click raise hand to ask questions as we go. If we start getting too off track with questions, I'll put a stop to it. And we do have official Q&A time at the end as well. But because it's a small group, I think it's better if we just ask any questions as we go. So without further ado, so here's an overview of what I'm going to be presenting today. So we'll start with an introduction to what community organising actually is, and then we'll go through the 5 organising or leadership practices that Marshall Gans sets out in this methodology of his that make up community organising. And then at the end we'll have time for Q&A if there's any more questions. So just want to again reiterate that this is not my own methodology that I've developed. This is based on the Leadership, Organising and Action manual and course by Nooralain Masood, Kusul Abbas and Eliza Sershid. And I took that course in March of this year, and they adapted that workshop based off of Marshall Gans's community organising methodology that he's developed over many, many, many years in the US. What I find really inspiring about this methodology is that it really has been used all around the world at this point. and is just effective no matter the context. And nowadays there's leaders from all around the world in this methodology, which I find really inspiring. And yeah, in the follow-up to this webinar, I'll be sharing with you a digital version of the manual that I'm essentially overviewing. It's a very thick manual. The course was 1 week long, and this webinar is essentially an overview of what's in that manual, so you can go and delve deeper into the parts that are of interest to you. So, what is community organising? Put simply, it's when people come together to make change by building and using their collective power. And we've got a nice little diagram of this. So an organizer, someone who is organising their community, asks, who are my people? Who is my community? What change do we need? And how can I support them, my community, to build their power to win and keep the change we need? So this kind of work is a form of leadership. It's about stepping up within your community and taking charge of the issues that your community is facing and stepping up and saying, I want to do something about this. And Marshall Ganz has a very particular definition of leadership, which I really resonate with, and that's accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. That's a lot of big words, but essentially this style of leadership is not actually about being at the front, being the face, being the spokes. It's about being behind the scenes and supporting others to become leaders themselves, and so on and so forth. So again, the first question an organizer must ask, who are my people? And a technical word that's often used in this methodology is constituency. And so a constituency is a group of people who learn to stand together to decide, assert, and act upon their goals. So you start with the question of who are my people, who is my community? So for example, I live in the suburb of Watson, so I'm a part of the Watson community. But the constituency is actually a subset of the community. It's the people from the community who step up and come together to take action together. And ideally, those two circles of the Venn diagram, what we're working towards is to completely overlap them. So everyone in a given community is standing up and joining forces and taking action and a part of the constituency. But that's just an important technical distinction because the term constituency is used throughout this methodology. So there's a lot of emphasis as well on power and building power in this methodology. And we can start to understand where power lies, whether it lies with the community or if somebody else currently has power that we need, by asking the following questions. What are the interests of your constituency? What does your constituency want? Who holds the resources needed to address those interests? And often the people who hold the resources to address your constituency's interests are not within your constituency. That would make this whole process a lot easier, but often power is being held by someone else, somewhere else. So then we ask, what are the interests of those people who hold those resources? For example, a local politician might have the power to make the change that your community needs. So we have to ask, what are their interests? What do they want? And then lastly, we ask, what resources do our constituency have that other person might want? So for example, in the case of a politician wants our votes. So our votes are one resource that we have, that we hold over that person, that politician, and that politician holds power over us. So these are the sorts of questions we start to ask when we're thinking about where is the power to make change. So when we talk about making change, we need to be really specific, concrete, and it needs to be meaningful. So this methodology isn't about changing the world, isn't about, you know, going for the jugular and solving capitalism, solving climate change. It's starting local. It's asking, what are the effects of climate change that my community are experiencing? And how can we tangibly solve those effects right now? And over time, as we work towards these tangible goals, we're building increasing power so that we can next time go for a bigger goal. And after that, go for an even bigger goal. So yeah, this methodology isn't about solving all the world's problems, but I don't think there is such a methodology. Rather, it's about starting local, figuring out what meaningful change we can bring about locally. It doesn't have to be, yeah, solving capitalism, because that's not going to happen. But how about, you know, rent relief or rent caps? That's a really, really tangible local goal that we can work towards, that is nested within that bigger end goal of, you know, addressing inequality in our society, addressing the unfair economic system that we find ourselves in. So community organising is not advocacy, which a lot of people, especially here in Canberra, would be familiar with. That's where specific individuals, usually experts or people with lived experience on a matter, will stand up and become a spokes for change. That's one way of bringing about change. I'm not saying it's a bad way, but it's a different way. And community organising is not that. It's not advocacy in that sense. It's also not mobilization. So that's where, you know, people will come out en masse by a group, an organizing body of some sort, and then everyone disperses. There's no further step. There's no relationships that have been made to keep those people together. Community organizing, on the other hand, is where the people who are facing the problems develop their leadership and use their own resources to solve their own problems and keep them solved. So it's developing capacity within the people experiencing the problem so they can solve the issue by themselves. So they're not dependent on an advocate, they're not dependent on an expert, they're not dependent on an organization like the Conservation Council, like me, a staff member, to come in and save the day. It's about building power within the community so they can solve their own problems and keep them solved. So how do we do this beautiful, magical thing of community organising? Well, Marshall Gans sets out 5 key leadership practices to organise one's community that each build on each other. So they come one after the other. And we can see in this table how each of these practices takes our community from some form of disorganisation to a form of organisation. So these leadership practices that organise our community are developing a shared story, building relationships, creating leadership teams and a clear structure for people to slot into, coming up with a creative strategy as a team, and then taking effective action and getting people to commit to that effective action. So each of these leadership practices will take our community from being passive to active, from being divided to united, from floating separately all over the place to coming together with a shared purpose, from being reactive to the problems we face to instead taking initiative, being proactive to get on the front foot. And lastly, from being, again, separate to coming together in strategic ways. And so, here's a visual representation of these 5 leadership practices. So you can see we've got creating a shared story, which in this methodology is called a public narrative, building relationships, creating a team, developing a strategy, and lastly, taking action. So for the rest of the webinar, I'll be stepping through each of these 5 leadership practices that organize one's community. So first up is creating a shared story, also known as a public narrative in this methodology. So community organizing is motivated by shared values, which are expressed through a public narrative. Now, a public narrative is a very specific thing, which I really appreciate because there's specific structure that you can follow to create this story, and you can trust that it'll then work as a motivational tool. So within the public narrative, we have 3 separate stories that link together one after the other. We have a story of self, which is about explaining to others why you care about the issue as the person stepping up and taking leadership as the organizer. And then we have a story of us, which is why do we care about this issue? Why does this issue affect us as a community? And why do we care about it? What are the values that we actually share? So this is about creating a sense of solidarity and a sense of togetherness. Lastly, you have a story of now, and this is explaining to people why we must act on this now, why we can't wait till next year, why we can't put this off indefinitely, why we need to start taking action together now. So each of these stories serves a really specific purpose. The first is to build trust, so people trust you, they get to know you. Then it's to create a sense of we're in this together and we owe it to each other to do something about this, and that we're not alone, and that's a really inspiring thing. And finally, that we need to do something about this now. This can't wait. And an effective public narrative, if you do it well, will move people from being passive to being active in the community, understanding that they're a community and that they can do things together as a community. And I've been using this public narrative technique since taking the training in March, and I've been blown away with how effective it is. It's honestly kind of scary how you can follow these really clear steps, and we're going to get into those clear steps on the next slide, and how people will just, the light will flick, and you can see it in their eyes that they've been brought along by the story you've told them, and that they are ready to take action at the end of this story. And another important point about this technique is it's to do with values as opposed to issues. So we're bringing people together and bringing people in based on shared values such as fairness or equality or safety, rather than bringing people together based on a specific issue. And it's better to bring people together based on shared values, because more people share more values than they do specific interests in a specific issue. So for example, people might be interested in the current Western Edge campaign that I'm running for different issue-based reasons. People might care because they're conservationists and they don't want to see critically endangered ecosystem be developed. Someone else might care about the Western Edge campaign because they don't want bushfire risk to be increased for their neighbouring neighbourhood. So they're different issue-based reasons why people might care, but we can bring those people together on a common value, and many more people with different issue interests, we can bring them all together around the same value of protecting others from harm, whether that's protecting species or like non-human species, I should say, or protecting humans from harm. So yeah, when we bring people together based on values, we can bring more people together than if we just focus on a specific issue such as bushfire risk or conserving an endangered species. So here's what a public narrative looks like in a visual format. As you can see on the left-hand side, values are the thread that connect the three distinct stories that make up a public narrative. So yeah, in the story of self, you explain when you learnt to care, when you found hope. And then in the story of us, you explain when did we realize that we care about this issue? When did we find our hope? And usually, and those values will be the same in the story of self and the story about us. So you're bringing everyone in the room together, or the person you're talking to, you're connecting over a common value. And then again, you draw on that value in the story of now. Why are we at urgent risk? But why are we still hopeful? And what are we going to do about it? Then on the right-hand side, we have the repeating structure of a challenge, a choice, and an outcome in each story. Now, this structure of challenge, choice, outcome is what makes a story a story. If you're missing one of these components, it's not a story, and you'll lose people's interests. As humans, we are natural storytellers. We've always told stories, and our brains respond to stories. Our brains don't respond to big numbers. Our brains respond to a challenge, a choice, and an outcome. So that's why this methodology uses the power of storytelling to compel people to take action. So yeah, the story of self and us is in the past. It's, proving that you have faced a challenge, and that in that moment of challenge, you made a choice, and that choice is indicative of the values you hold. And a positive outcome happened, or it doesn't even have to be a positive outcome, but just that an outcome happened, so that we've got that narrative structure. And in that way, you're proving to people that you really do have the values you say you do. And then you're telling a story of us, which is also in the past. What's a challenge that we have already faced? And what choice did we make in that moment? And what was the outcome? And this is about reminding people that we've faced challenges as a community before, and we've overcome them before, and creating that sense of togetherness. And then finally, the story of now is the story that we're now writing together. We're now facing a new challenge. And so we have a choice to make. So will you join me? What choice will you make? Will you join? That's the choice. And later on, we'll get to how to create a motivational ask that's a part of your story of now. So if you'd like to learn more about this technique of creating a public narrative as the foundation for community organising, you can head to page 28, 61, 101 and 107 within the Leadership Organising and Action Manual that you'll be sent after this webinar for more information. So the next leadership practice to organise one's community is creating relational commitment. So when we organise, we are building relationships with new people, which in turn become a source of new material resources, leadership, commitment, imagination, and most importantly, even more relationships. Ultimately, what we're doing is building people power. The numbers that we have are almost always our most powerful resource that we can then deploy. So that's why building relationships is so important, because we need to be strongly connected with one another, so that we can keep growing our numbers, so people don't just drift off easily. So when we build relationships, we are not simply asking someone for something once off. We are instead taking the time to get to know their story, their values and interests, share your own values and interests so that together you can start to understand how our values, interests and resources might overlap to achieve a common purpose. And then it's about making a commitment not to do a specific thing, but a commitment to each other, after recognizing, look, we have a common interest and we have different resources that if we bring them together, we might be able to reach that common interest more effectively. So we're making a commitment to each other to work together, whatever that might entail. And this is very different to mobilizing, which is simply asking someone for something at a specific time. For example, sign this petition, come to this rally. So one way to initiate intentional relationships is by having a one-on-one with someone. Now, this is something that can happen completely organically, and at the start of your organizing will happen organically. You don't have people who've heard about the campaign and are reaching out to you to find a time to chat. Instead, you're approaching someone, and you're getting their attention, and you're being upfront about why you want to chat. You're saying, I think you might be interested in this issue that I want to address. And then it's taking the time, and this is where you spend the most time, exploring their interest in this issue. And importantly, it's not just talking about the issue, whatever it may be, but asking them, why do they care about it? So when I run the Western Edge campaign, I ask, why do you care about saving our Western Edge? Because people have so many different reasons. And it's really about drilling into their values that motivates them to get involved. And it's also a two-way conversation. You're then sharing why you care, and then you can start to connect the dots and say, look, we care about this for the same reasons. We share an interest in this, and we have resources that we can bring together to start to work towards this common purpose. So then you're exchanging what those different resources are. And finally, you're making a commitment. And usually that is to meet again. Relationship building is not a one-off conversation. That's more like mobilizing. That's asking someone to come to a rally. Instead, it's saying, we're committing to work together towards our common interest, our common goal that we've just unearthed. Let's meet in 2 weeks' time to touch base and go from there. I'm just going to turn off the heater in the office because it's kind of getting really hot in here. Okay, sorry about that. I'll stop baking alive now. All right, on to the third leadership practice. So at this point, you have developed your public narrative, and you're starting to share that with people to motivate them to get involved, and then you're building relationships with those people. And now the next step is to organize these people into an effective structure. And most importantly, to start building your leadership team. So a leadership team offers a structured way to work together interdependently, each person taking leadership on one part of the team's activities. At their best, a leadership team recognizes and puts to productive use the different talents of the individuals who make up the team. A leadership team enables the development of better strategy as there's more perspectives and ideas in the room. And at the end of the day, we simply can't build people power alone. It goes against people power. We need to learn how to work together. So the 3 conditions that make for a real team is that, first of all, it's bounded. You can name the people on it. Everybody who's on the team knows they're on the team and has made a commitment to be on the team, and they don't come and go. So most highly effective teams have no more than 4 to 8 members. Secondly, your team is stable. It meets regularly, it's the same people each time, and it's the same people for the long term. That's not to say that when people join a leadership team, they're making a commitment till the day they die. It's just to say that the team can operate as a leadership team effectively. So people are joining long enough to keep growing the rest of the structure, so that we can keep building our power. If people are leaving too soon, you might lose some of that power that they were building. And lastly, your team is interdependent. So the contribution that each person makes is critical to the success of the whole. And this prevents hierarchies from forming. This ensures that everybody has to be a leader. Everybody has to step up and take responsibility for the work to be successful. Now, I know this sort of a team sounds like wishful thinking, but if you have taken the time to build real relationships, to really understand the people that share your interests, then this is the sort of commitment, real commitment that you can then get from people. And something that I found surprising in the training I took was you actually often have to make the hard decision of who should not be on the leadership team, right? You can't have everyone on the leadership team. And in a bit, I'm going to show you how we can scale up so that we are not excluding people, but you want your leadership team to be a really specific group of people, people who can make that long-term commitment, that regular commitment, people that can work interdependently, that have the same shared values and interests. And then you can start to wrap everyone else around that leadership team. And I'll show you how we do that in 2 slides time. But first of all, to launch an effective team, you need to develop a shared and engaging purpose that makes it clear what you have created the team to do, who you will be doing it with, your constituency, and what activities your team will participate in. So every member of the team needs to understand and believe in this shared purpose. Then you need to create clear interdependent roles. Again, so the success of the whole depends on all team members and prevents a hierarchy from forming. And lastly, you need to decide how your team will work together. How often are you going to meet? How will you communicate between meetings? Where will you store your work? How will decisions be made? Will it be by consensus or simple majority? How will you handle conflict or instances of broken ground rules? When you lay this all out really clearly in the very first meeting, then you're much more likely to be able to weather what's to come. So here's how this initial leadership team can scale up to onboard new leaders and new people into achieving the common purpose. Because even though you start with the initial leadership team, that leadership team isn't more important than the new people you bring on. So I'll get to how that structure happens, but first we'll look at the first 2 kind of structures that we often see instead. The first is the dot, and this is where there's one person everyone goes to for help. I really relate to this. I think most people on this call, most people who are leaders within our environmental community here are often the dot. You know, you fall into this habit of just taking on all of the grunt work that nobody else wants to do. And people start to learn, oh, Aoibhinn can do that. She already does that sort of thing. Aoibhinn knows how to do that. Aoibhinn can do that. And so suddenly everyone's coming to you. That's a really bad position to put yourself in. It's not effective. You can't build power. You're not creating new leaders to take on new work. The other structure that we often see is that everyone's a leader. People are sick and tired of working in a team, joining endless meetings. So they're just going to strike out and do their own thing. And then what you have is everyone going off in different directions. There's no coordination, there's no efficiency. So what we want to aim for instead is each person being responsible for others in what then is a snowflake and a scalable structure. So you can see in this diagram, oh, my mouse is working. These 5 people would make up the initial leadership team. And you don't even necessarily have to have this person in the middle. That, for example, their role could be convener of the leadership team. So they're responsible for these other 4 people in the leadership team. But you don't need that person in the middle. You could just have these 4 people who meet regularly as the initial leadership team. Now, the most effective role for people in community organizing is to be responsible for other people. You know, all the like functional stuff like social media posts, event management, that can come later. What's most critical is that you are responsible for, in this case, we can see in this diagram, each leader is responsible for 3 other people who they are helping to become leaders. And you can imagine then that those 3 people, their role is to then bring in 3 new people, and they're responsible for those 3 people, and so on and so forth. So you create this scalable, interdependent structure. Now, okay, so if you want to learn more about building team structure, you can head to page 18 and page 50 to 60 of the Leadership Organising and Action Manual. So now you've got your team together, it's time to develop your strategy to win. So strategy is turning the resources you have into the power you need to get what you want, your goal. Your goal should be a clear, measurable point that allows you to know if you've won or lost, and that meets the challenge your constituency faces. It has to be something worthwhile. You know, community organizing is not about getting people to do small itty-bitty things that really don't amount to anything. It's actually asking people to do quite sizable tasks, to make quite large commitments, because it's worth it, because those large commitments can achieve a significant goal. Now, the issue that we always run into, those of us who want to change the world, is that, you know, we realize that there's these really massive challenges, these really massive systems that aren't working. So, for example, how do we fix capitalism? How do we solve climate change? And realistically, this methodology, again, is not about solving climate change straight off the bat, because I don't think there's any such methodology. Instead, it's about breaking down that ultimate goal into smaller nested goals that build on each other. So you start off with a local, tangible goal that's realistic for you to achieve when you're starting from scratch. So, you know, maybe the local council keeps mowing the grass in your park, and it's bringing all these weeds in, and it's just that the weeds are going everywhere. You know, this is a small but tangible, like we can see that goal if we stop the mowing. So you start there, and once you've achieved that goal, you would have built a certain amount of power to reach it. So then you can aim for a bigger goal next time, and so on and so forth. So these are the questions you need to answer in your leadership team to develop your strategy. And it's really important you do this with your leadership team, so you have the most information available, the most perspectives, the most ideas, and buy-in. If you create the strategy by yourself and then go and ask people to get involved, it's much less inspiring than saying, hey, we are facing the same challenge, we have the same common interests. Do you want to work with me to come up with a plan to address this? So these are the, is it 6 questions that you need to ask in your team? And if you want more information on the first 4 strategic questions, you can head to page 72 to 86 of the Leadership Organising and Action Manual, because we don't have time to go through it today. Instead, I'll just be covering the final 2 questions. So tactics are the specific actions through which your strategy is implemented. Strategy without tactics is simply an idea. Tactics without strategy is a waste of resources. So the strategy informs your tactics, and we learn from our tactics to then adapt our strategy. It's a positive feedback. So tactics should be strategic. We have to ask ourselves, do they enable our constituency to turn our resources into the power we need to reach our goal? Tactics should be motivational. Do they create courage? Do they inspire our community? Are they fun? Does our community want to do this? And it's not so much about, you know, creating an easy ask, but is it something that's inspiring? It might be difficult, but it has to be, you know, inspiring. You don't want to ask people, I've run into this in my own organizing. You really don't want to ask people to do something that isn't clearly linked to the change we're trying to seek and is really boring or really difficult or just, yeah, a waste of time in their eyes. And finally, you want to make sure that your tactic is bringing more people in and developing the capacity of the people who are already involved. So we can break tactics down into two broad kinds, those which build our power and then those which demonstrate our power. So building power happens behind the scenes. We're asking people to sign a petition. We're calling people who we think might be interested and asking them to get involved. We're running campaign information nights where people who are already involved bring 3 friends who they think might be involved. And then once we've built some power, we need to demonstrate the power that we've built at that point. So that could be, you know, a campaign kickoff where you get the 50 first people together in a room, and that's a publicly announced event, and you do some media about it. Or you show how many people you have involved at a rally. You get 100 people, the people already involved, to write a letter to a particular power holder. You go on strike. So how we then put these different tactics into a timeline is by thinking of our demonstrating power tactics as peaks and the building power tactics as the little ramps that get us to each peak. So you work backwards from your strategic goal. You have your goal, and then you've brainstormed the different ways you can build power, the different ways you can demonstrate power, and you put your biggest demonstrations of power after your goal. You know, what is the final thing you're going to do that will push the decision maker you're targeting, the power holder you're targeting, over the edge? And you work backwards. So you place all of your peaks from the biggest to the smallest, and then you place your building power tactics in between. So initially, you might start by calling people who you know who might be interested in this campaign, or calling people who might know people who are interested. That's your initial building power tactic. And then you'll develop your leadership team from that. You'll develop your strategy, and then you'll have your first peak is often a campaign kickoff. So an event in 2 months' time. And between now and then, the building power tactic is again calling people, asking them to show up, asking them to bring a friend. So that brings us to the final leadership practice, which is taking action. It's asking people to take action. So how do we get people to commit to taking action? We can use what is called the 4 C's framework, which is used not just in this methodology, but by lots of campaigners, lots of community organizers. And that's so we make the ask, we connect with the person, and we make the ask as specific as you can. You know, you might have a backup ask in your pocket if there's like a logistical reason that the person can't say they're not available for that event. They're already busy, they've already got plans. So you can have a backup ask, but you only want to present one specific ask. And then you want to explain why it's important that they come to that event, why it's important they commit. So you want to connect that ask to the to the plan to win, the strategy. So you say this, if we do this together, it will get us to this point, which will then get us to this point, which will then solve the challenge we face. And so then at that point, once you've explained why it's important they commit, you ask, all right, can I count on you to show up on the 10th of June? And it's really important at this point that you wait in silence. You make your ask and you wait in silence, wait for them to respond. Unless it's a hard no, and there's, I'm busy on that day or something. If it's just I'm not sure, or it's some sort of excuse, then you wanna ask why. Why do you feel like that? Why? This work, I'm not very good at this. I'm learning how to do this. It's hard. But if we remember that we're not asking people favors, we're asking them to get involved in something that's in their interest. It's, a group of us have already done some work of figuring out a strategy to achieve something that is in all of our interest. Do you want to help bring that about? It's not asking people for favors. It's asking people to help themselves. It's giving them the opportunity to help themselves. And finally, after you've got them to a yes, hopefully, you want to catapult them, which is really lock in their commitment. So if they've said, yes, I can come to that event, a good catapult is, can you bring 3 friends? We need 100 people for this event to be effective. It's awesome that you can come, but can you bring 3 more people to get us to 100? Or an easier catapult is, okay, do you know how you're going to get there? So you can help them make their plans, so it's more likely that they'll come true on that commitment. And lastly, it's really important, again, I mentioned this earlier, that our asks, the ask that we, have in the story of now, this is why it's urgent that we act, and this is what we all need to do right now. We need that ask to be motivational. So something that really matters, something where people can see that their contribution is a crucial part of the strategy. Something where people get to use multiple skills and develop their skills. So it's interesting in that regard. Something where people can choose how to do it that suits their own needs, and something where people can see how they're going. So you don't want to make an ask of someone and then not talk to them ever again. You want to make sure that there's a way for people to touch base if they need help, or to get feedback after the fact. So if you want to get more information on mobilising commitment, you can go to page 92 to 100 of the Leadership, Organising and Action Manual. And yeah, with that, we've just overviewed the 5 leadership practices that we build on each other to organise one's community. And yeah, you can find all of these are set out in much more detail in the Leadership, Organising and Action Manual. But I've now gone a bit longer than I'd hoped. Apologies, but we'll open the floor to any questions for the final 7 minutes. All good, Jonathan. See you. So feel free to type your question into the chat or just come off mute. If you don't have questions, that's fine. Hopefully that's a good sign for me. But if you do, please go ahead.
Hey, Aoibhinn, I'll jump in with questions, if that's right.
Yeah.
I guess I'm interested in your personal reflection, having been applying this, and the tension, and how do you navigate, or maybe you have examples from other people that you've heard of, the tension between like a sense of urgency for a lot of the issues that people might be organizing for, and like you just articulated in some of the steps, the need to kind of give people time to come on board.
Yeah, well, I think what this methodology is does quite effectively that I haven't seen in other methodologies is actually kind of curate a sense of urgency. For example, with the Western Edge campaign, the bulldozers aren't rolling in tomorrow. So I need to create a sense of urgency amongst Canberrans that this is something we need to address now. If you are in a situation where the bulldozers are rolling in tomorrow, your job's a lot easier in one sense because people can really see the imminent threat, and our monkey brains are triggered in that sense without all of this magic organizing work. So yeah, I think what also helps handle that tension between urgency and taking the time to, for example, build relationships is again the snowflake structure that I showed, which I'll quickly go back to. You start with 4 to 8 people who really understand the urgency of this right now and are ready to commit, to meeting weekly, fortnightly to address this issue right now. And each of those people, their priority, besides from functional roles like social media or event management or whatever, everyone's priority in a community organizing campaign is which relationships can I start to nurture to bring more people in. So you've got that 4 to 8 core leadership team doing the doing like technical work, like the next tactic. But at the same time, they're doing that relational work, and this snowflake will start to scale up as we go. Hopefully that answers your question. I'll open the floor to any other questions, but Amy, if you want me to further expand, if nobody else jumps in, I can do that.
Hey, Aoibhinn, Peter here. Just to say, this has been really interesting. Thank you very much. I got to go.
Okay.
And it fits in a little bit. It would be interesting to sort of balance this with the rising tide wave and thinking a bit more about how this sort of community organizing links in with mobilizing, because obviously mobilizing is a demonstrate power structure as well as a building sort of power structure. Anyway, thank you. See you later.
Thanks, Peter. I'd be
Cheers.
happy to meet with Rising Tide to chat about how this slots in with the Rising Tide strategy. So we can do that in a Rising Tide session sometime.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Any other questions? Thanks, Carl. I'm glad to hear that it was valuable. And thanks, Izzy.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, looks like people are heading off or don't have questions. So yeah, I guess please send me an email if you have further questions or give my landline a call. I'll put my email into the chat. Nope, that's my personal email. I'll just put this into the chat. So yeah, the whole point of this, as I just said, is building relationships, building leaders. So I really I believe in this methodology and want to put it genuinely into practice. So yeah, let's keep talking. Send me an email or give my landline a call. I unfortunately don't have my landline handy, but it's on the website. And we can keep chatting about this methodology and how it might be used. All right. Well, unless there's any last questions, I think we'll wrap it at exactly 1 hour. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.